Okay, guys. So, what I want to do tonight is talk about Daniel chapter 2. And we're going to skip around a little bit. This won't be a solid walk through Daniel chapter by chapter by chapter, because there are some prophecies that we're going to get into, and they're going to lean more on other prophecies that's in Daniel. They'll explain themselves more by just simply reading more of Daniel. So what we talk about tonight, we'll see that unfold more in even other prophecies that are in Daniel. There are some prophecies in Daniel that we will come back to, and they will just simply be about things that are happening in Daniel's time, maybe, and stuff that doesn't necessarily tie in as deeply with others. We're going to start in Daniel chapter 2, and just to make sure to get us there, I want to give you the setup. So Daniel, we talked about how Daniel got to Babylon in Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom last week. And so Daniel gets there, and he's a good Jewish boy, and he doesn't really want to assimilate into the Babylonian culture. And that's because they don't eat kosher food, they don't behave, they lots of the stuff they've eaten has been sacrificed to idols, this and that and other. So they're bringing him, remember, he's part of the first deportation, and so they're bringing him in as part of the best and the brightest that Israel has to offer, that the nation of Judah has to offer, and they're going to put him to work in the king's court. There's a reason why they brought the best and the brightest first. So basically what they want to do is they want to make him a Babylonian, and he refuses, and he says, look, I'm thankful that you offer me all of this food from the king's table and stuff, but I can't. It's against my religion. I cannot, with good conscience, eat these foods. And God gives him the strength to stand up and the courage to say, I know this may mean my death, but I have to do this. And so he does it God's way. He ends up being more healthy than the people, him and his friends, who are renamed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are more healthy than the people who have been eating from the king's table, as it turns out. So because Daniel honored God's wishes in a dangerous position, God rewarded him by getting the highest favors from Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, basically, and earning the highest place in his court in the most respect. So in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, after Daniel's been integrated into the court, then Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and he wants somebody to interpret it. Now, it would be pretty easy if I said, Becky, I had this dream, and the whole dream was this, and now I want you to interpret it. Well, you could make something up, and I wouldn't know whether you were telling the truth or not. But what would happen if I said, okay, Becky, tell me what I dreamed last night? Yeah, Bob, tell me what I dreamed last night. Anybody here want to tell me what I dreamed last night? What did that bad piece of pepperoni make me dream last night? All right. So that's basically what happens. Nebuchadnezzar brings in all of his wise men and says, all right, guys, you tell me what I dreamed. And that way I'll know if your interpretation is true. And they all say, you got to be kidding me, right? Oh, that's a good one, King. Just really tell us the dream, and then we'll tell you what it's about. And he said, no, you tell me the dream. If you're that wise, if you're that smart, if you have that much insight, you tell me what the dream's about. So, of course, they can't do it. I mean, who in the world could? And he says, okay, guys, you're pretty much all charlatans, so I'm going to have you all, you've displeased me, I'm the king, you're all going to die. And on this set date, you're all going to die. So they bring Daniel in, and Daniel says, okay, King, I know that you told these guys they only had one chance, but give me a couple days. I have to pray because it's not in man's power to know what somebody else dreams, but it is in God's power. So this is an acceptable answer to the king. He says, okay, go pray to your God of heaven, and find out what he has to say about this. So Daniel goes back. He tells his friends, hey, guys, we're in a real pickle, and you really, really need to pray that God will give me the answer to this. So after a few days of prayer, God gives Daniel the vision, and he strides confidently into the king's courtroom and says, King, I have your answer. So in Daniel chapter 2, starting in verse 31, here's Daniel's answer to the king. He says, "Your Majesty, as you were watching, suddenly a colossal statue appeared. That statue, tall and dazzling, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was terrifying. The head of the statue was pure gold, its chest and arms were silver, its stomach and thighs were bronze, its legs were iron, and its feet were partly iron and partly fired clay. As you were watching, a stone broke off without a hand touching it, struck the statue on its feet of iron and fired clay, and crushed them. Then the iron, the fired clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were shattered and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, and not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." Now, like we've talked about before, there are lots of people who give vague prophecies. The Bible interprets, all right? And what we're going to find out is that there are more places in the Bible, in Daniel as a matter of fact, that are going to build off of this interpretation. So he goes on in verse 36 and he says, "This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. Your Majesty, you are King of kings. The God of heavens has given you sovereignty, power, strength, and glory. Wherever people live, or wild animals, or birds of the sky, he has handed them over to you and made you ruler of them all. You are the head of gold. After you will arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, and then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule the whole earth. And a fourth kingdom will be as strong as iron, for iron crushes and shatters everything. And like iron that smashes, it will crush and smash all others. You will be a divided kingdom, though some of the strength of the iron will be in it. And you saw the iron mixed with clay, and the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly fired clay. Part of the kingdom will be strong, and part will be brittle. You saw the iron mixed with clay, and the peoples will mix one with another, but will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with fired clay. In the days of those kings, the God of the heavens will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, and his kingdom will not be left to another people. It will crush all these kingdoms and bring them to the end, but itself endure forever. You saw a stone break off the mountain without a hand touching it, and it crushed the iron, bronze, fired clay, silver, and gold. And the great God has told the king what will happen in the future. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is reliable." So later on, when we get it farther in, and if you look in your notes, you'll see that there's more places in Daniel to go ahead and read onto. And it would really help if everyone would go ahead and read the book of Daniel. It's only 11 chapters. It's not that long. Some of it can be a little confusing, but we're going to try to work through that and help you to understand that. So as you go through and read your notes, you can also go through at the places where I've given you further references and look at that. Also, so guys, if you want a great reference, I've used about half a dozen references in this, but if you want a really good reference, you can go to lifeway.com, and their Rose Publishing has some little pamphlets, and they're just little small things. They also have some big books full of timelines and charts and stuff. They're great little resources, and they explain stuff really nicely. So if you want to go to lifeway.com, and they actually have one here for Daniel statue that'll help you kind of look on here and look at some other resources, because there may be some things on here that I tell you that you may not agree with. There are some things on the Daniel chart that Rose Publishing puts out that I don't necessarily agree with. I'm a history nerd, so I double check dates and times and stuff that things happen. So there's a time date stamp there that I don't really agree with, and I used mine that I researched instead of theirs. But so let's dive in here. That's a good resource. Just check that out. Let's dive in here and look at this prophecy. So it doesn't sound like much, maybe that, okay, so Daniel gave us 4 kingdoms that are going to come, right? Doesn't sound like a whole lot, right? I mean, that when we look back at it and we have hindsight, we say, okay, well, yeah, he told us about 4 kingdoms. But quick, guys, tell me how many kingdoms are going to arise that cover the continental United States in the next 1,000 years, and go. What, crickets? No, he's opening your mouth. Paige and Chloe say 2. I'd love to know what they base that on. Maybe Mexico and Canada are going to absorb us is what they think. But anyway, so when we sit back and think about it, when we go through this, it looks like it doesn't look that impressive. But it really is very impressive that he's looking 1,080 years through history, and he looks and tells everyone that is going to rule the area that he's now in and that now surrounds his homeland. So we start off with the head of gold. Of course, that's the Babylonian Empire. And in 626 BC, 626 years before Christ, remember BC starts off large and gets smaller as we come to the time of Christ, so it's decreasing the further into the future it goes. So we see that there's a guy named Nabopolassar, and he is in 626 BC, he founds the Babylonian Empire, but it never really hits its stride and its glory until 605 BC. And what happens then is Nebuchadnezzar is a prince. He's off fighting against Egypt and its allies, and his father dies at home while he's off winning the battle and solidifying the empire. So in 605 BC, he really enters the glory years, and he rules for 43 years until 562 BC. Babylon is just this immensely rich and prosperous empire during this time. And a few lesser rulers come on the scene, and they rule till 539 BC until the fall of Babylon. Now, you can check that out and all about the fall of Babylon in Daniel chapter 5. Then we have the chest and the arms of silver. Now, that is the Medo-Persian Empire. It is a confederation of 2 nations, and we'll learn more about those later. But it lasted from 539. It was actually the nation that we read about in Daniel chapter 5 that overthrew the Babylonian Empire. And Darius the Mede, who is one of the kings, one of the heads of the Medo-Persian Empire, invades Babylon. And he does it basically there's a river going through the middle of Babylon. He dams up the river while they're sleeping and walks through the riverbed. Marches his army through the riverbed under the gates of the city and in and takes them without a fight. So the Medes and the Persians, they are in modern day Iran. The Medes are located up north, more about where Tehran is right now. And the Persians, they are more towards the south. Now, they're much richer because they are stationed right there. Their country is right on the Persian Gulf, so they have a lot of trade going on. And, of course, they're just more rich and more powerful. And we'll find out more about that later on in Daniel as well. But their empire would last for 208 years. By the way, have anybody ever heard of Cyrus the Great? He's the guy that's mentioned by Isaiah probably about 400 years before his birth. He is actually the person who is going to set Israel free and pay for the temple to be rebuilt. When he goes in and conquers places, he's often seen as a liberator of conquered people, because what he does is he takes the conquered people and says, go back to your original land, pay me taxes, and it's all good. So people kind of like to see Cyrus coming. He's actually the main guy in the Medo-Persian Empire. But that would last for 208 years, and it would finally end in 331 BC. And now that kingdom, they're silver because they last longer, they have more territory, but you know how people look back on things and it's always the good old days, right? Well, the Medo-Persian Empire is never looked back upon with the grandeur of Babylon. They may have had more money and they may have had larger territory, but just the opulence of the empire itself, just the way it was laid out, it just wasn't quite the same. It just didn't quite have the shine of the Babylonian Empire. Next we have and also the 2 arms. The reason that the Medo-Persian Empire is the chest and the arms is because it is 2 nations coming together to make one. So they are a confederation of nations, 2 coming in to make one. The arms signify the coming together of 2 nations. Next we have, so they fall in 331 BC. And basically what happens is Alexander the Great begins his war against the Medo-Persian Empire in 334 BC at the age of 22. And by the age of 25, he has defeated them soundly at the final battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC. And Alexander would go on, he would conquer the known world, all of the great empires of his time, he would conquer, but die at the age of 32 in 323 BC. Now, Alexander, he had an unconventional lifestyle to say the least, so he had no heirs. And with no children to take over his kingdom, his 4 generals spent the next 40 years struggling until they finally decided, look, we're going to divide the empire up. And in Egypt, they would be divided up in Egypt, Syria, Macedonia, and Pergamum. And you'll see in your notes that it was basically 4 generals. Those are their 4 families took on kind of as kings of those areas of the empire and ruled them. And Syria and Egypt will continue to fight for the rest of the time there. And so we see that, that the statue, we see the hips, and then it splits into the legs. So it starts off as a solid kingdom and then is divided. And that's the significance of it being the hips and the thighs of the statue, is that it starts as a solid kingdom and becomes divided. Now, you'll also notice that if you get into, and we'll see in Daniel chapter 11, that for about the next 150 years after Alexander dies, that Daniel chapter 11 is a quite extensive history of the argument between Egypt, the rulers of Egypt, and the rulers of Assyria over the Holy Land. And they basically get the worst end and the brunt of it. It's kind of like the crown jewel that they're fighting over, and each one trades it back and forth in wars and battles, and Israel really gets the bad end of it. But we can learn more. Also, one last thing, one of the reasons that it's depicted by bronze is because Alexander equipped all of his men with bronze shields. So his vast army was equipped with the bronze shields. And we'll learn more about that empire in Daniel chapter 7, 8, 10, and 11. So if you want to go check out more about that, it'll be in Daniel chapter 11. Now, the legs of iron and the feet of clay and iron. Specifically right now, we're going to talk about the legs of iron. And that would be the Roman Empire. In 146 BC, the Roman Empire vanquished its arch rival Carthage, which was basically the remains of the western side of the Greek Empire, and focused its attention on the eastern side of the Greek Empire. And finally, at the Battle of Corinth, defeated the eastern forces of the Greek Empire. And although the Greek Empire would have a huge impact on the culture of Rome, Rome really did not have a culture. They basically adopted the gods of the Greeks and the culture of the Greeks to some extent and took that in as their own. So they really absorbed the Greek Empire than they did do away with them completely. But in 146 BC, the Roman Empire at the Battle of Corinth defeats the Greek army, and that's the end of the Greek Empire. So Rome is the last empire that's pretty much mentioned here. So the reason that we only go for 4 main empires, is that these are the empires that are going to have an effect on the land of Israel until its destruction in 70 AD. When Rome destroys Israel in 70 AD, it is also the lineage of empires that will be taking control of the Holy Land up until the time of the Messiah will come. Now, we'll learn more about that in Daniel's 70 weeks. But that's why he doesn't keep going. Obviously, the next thing to come that would rule this area would be the Ottoman Empire, and then it will be broken up around World War II, and there'll be all kinds of different people. The British will occupy it. Different entities will occupy the land that they want to call Palestine, which is Israel, the Israeli homeland. But we stop here with this empire. Now, Rome their time of ruling, it's kind of varied, because when you look at it, they will rule, the Roman Empire split in 395 BC, or AD, 395 AD. And it's basically, the empire grows so large that they cannot control it all from one capital. So Constantine has, by this time, moved the main capital of the Roman Empire to Constantinople. Think modern-day Istanbul in Turkey. And Rome has become somewhat of a secondary. It's harder to defend than the Constantinople is. So he moves it there. But later on, they split it, and they do move power to the Western Empire back to Rome. And then the eastern side becomes the Byzantine Empire. Now, the western side, it won't fare so well. In 410, the Visigoths come and they sack Rome, pretty much take most of the wealth, burn most of the place. And the Romans come back, but in 476 AD, they've been so weakened that a Germanic ruler comes in, deposes Romulus, the last emperor of Rome, and so the Western Roman Empire, as we know it, is no more, and that would be the fall of Rome. And the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Empire, will continue on with Constantinople as its capital until 1453 AD, when Islam takes over in the Ottoman Empire. So that's pretty much we see the split of the Roman Empire there. It'll be strong, but it'll eventually split. Now, what we're going to look at next is when we get to the toes, we see a future yet to come nation. All of the nations that we've talked about so far have been nations, obviously, that have come and gone. And that's one of the things that I really love about Daniel, is that there's so much prophecy that's fulfilled. Because when I can look back in history and I can look and see what's happened, then it amazes me. Do you know that there are people who do not believe that Daniel could have been written at the point in time that it was written, because the prophecy is so specific? And the more we go on to learn about this, the more specific it will get. This is kind of the vaguest prophecy in Daniel, but it will get more and more specific. And anyway, this is really what set Daniel up as the man in Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom and courtyard. But it just is interesting to see people that will say that because these have been so specific and these other prophecies have been so specific, that we can't accept Daniel is written as far back in time and actually during this time period. They will actually say that it was written during the intertestamental period of time when some of the prophecy was being fulfilled. But the kicker to this is, if you look in Ezekiel, if you check out the book of Ezekiel that was written during the whole time that Daniel was being written, Ezekiel mentions Daniel as being a wise man in Babylon. So nobody argues the time period of Ezekiel, but they argue that Daniel wasn't a real person until you read the book of Ezekiel, and then it kind of all goes down the drain. Their argument goes away. So we get back to this. So now we're coming to the yet future empire that's come. And this will be a revision or a revived Roman Empire. Now, let me tell you this. The other empires we can look back at and we can be very sure of, okay? Because history has already fulfilled that portion of the prophecy. This is my opinion, based on studies elsewhere in the book of Daniel, and based on its relationship to the legs of iron. Okay, it's the same material. So based on my other studies, this is what I am presenting. If I'm wrong on this in the future, don't be shocked. People have been wrong before about prophecy, about future prophecy. One thing is for sure, that this will be fulfilled, and we're going to go on and get more specific in the book of Daniel. Specifically, Daniel 7, 9, 10, and 11 will reveal more about this empire, but it will be a loose confederation. It will not be as strong as the original Roman Empire. It will just be something that's thrown together. They'll still try to keep their own independence at the same time as they are a confederation of states. But this empire is coming to a final end, and it will be wiped out in an instant and without warning. And it will be wiped out quickly, without warning, and there will be no army march on it. There will be no great conquering foe of mankind that comes to it. It will be the stone that is broken off from the mountain by no one's power other than the stone itself. It says, so we look at this stone here. The stone is the final kingdom. And its time frame will be eternal. It really has no beginning. It has no ending. It's always been there. The stone has always been there. The stone wasn't a new creation. It doesn't begin at the end of another one. It's simply broken off of the mountain. Now the stone is Christ, and it is broken off from the Father. Christ was sent from the Father to set up God's kingdom. He will come not by the work of man. It will not be expected when it comes. It will have no end, and unlike these other kingdoms, it will have no one to inherit it. No one will be there waiting in the wings. It won't need another successor. It won't need someone to pick up the crown when one king dies. The other kingdoms will be totally destroyed. And what's even stranger is we look at these other four kingdoms that are there, and we look back and we remember them, right? Like we can definitely look back in history and talk about the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire and the Medo-Persian Empire and the Babylonian Empire. This is going to grind them into dust. It's going to grind them completely out of memory. It will be so great and so just overwhelming that it's going to take the memory of other kingdoms away. All we will be able to see is this kingdom. If you look out of Saddam Hussein's old palace right now, what used to be his palace before he met the gallows, you can look and see the remains of the city of Babylon. There won't be any remains of any former empires. It will just be this empire. And that's the kingdom of God that will come. So, as a summary of this, Daniel's given us an accurate, fulfilled vision for, at the very least, if we go by the splitting of the Roman Empire, at the very least, 1,081 years. Based on his history of fulfilled prophecy, the four kingdoms, the four empires that we've seen come and go, we can totally trust what he says about the empires that are to come. We can have trust that when he says that God's kingdom is coming and it's going to fill the whole earth and it's going to come, in a time that we don't expect it, and it's going to come, without notice, then we can take his word that God is going to come and he is going to establish his kingdom, is going to have power and glory and reign forever. So, guys, that is the long version of Daniel's statue. So Becky said, what was my opinion? My opinion is that this empire of the feet with the 10 toes is going to be the revived area of the revived Roman Empire. Now, that may or may not be, but that is my opinion, just based on the studies. And after this, you can either agree or don't agree. Matter of fact, I encourage you to read this and look for something different. Read it, check it out. Never take a pastor or a Bible teacher or anyone just at face value. That's how people get led astray. I really encourage you to pick up your Bibles, read through here, find something, call me and argue with me about it. That'll be great. At least I know you're reading your Bibles. It's better to have people call you and argue after they have actually read the Bible than just take it and go, okay. Yeah.